Picture a Panzer III sitting motionless on a Long Island sand dune, its gun still pointing west, its fuel drums empty. German soldiers did reach American soil. That part of the story is settled. What this script traces is the chain of decisions, distances, and mathematics that turned a landing on American beaches into a death sentence for the men who made it. The question that actually matters is not whether Germany could touch the coastline, but whether it could take a deep water port capable of moving more than 20,000 tons of cargo every single day and hold that port for 14 days before running out of everything. The telephone wire went dead at Montauk Point sometime before dawn. A Coast Guard lookout climbed to the lighthouse gallery, looked east through the pre-dawn mist, and counted silhouettes, dozens of converted freighters, low-slung shapes cutting through gray swells. German Brandenburger commandos had been ashore since midnight, cutting landlines along the Long Island shore. The lookout fired 2 red parachute flares, grabbed a battery-powered shortwave set, and started transmitting before a German destroyer opened fire with its 5-inch deck guns and turned the tower into rubble. 2 watchmen went down. The flash message reached Eastern Defense Command anyway. That moment of confusion is worth holding on to. Think about what people assume when they hear Nazi invasion of America. They imagine an unstoppable armada brushing aside a soft, unguarded coast. In reality, the Germans had achieved something genuine: surprise, forward staging bases in the Atlantic, and a concentrated first echelon of roughly 80,000 troops. They had also just walked into one of the most lethal ambushes in the history of coastal artillery. Inside Battery Gray at Fort Church, Rhode Island, the gun crew did not need clear sky. The M1 gun data computer, a purely mechanical plotting machine, fed target coordinates from shore radar bearings through gyro-corrected firing solutions. The gun barrel elevated with a hydraulic hiss inside 10 feet of reinforced concrete. This was the first thing Germany's planners appear to have underestimated. A fixed battery is not a sitting target. It is a bomb-proof firing platform with electronic eyes, capable of dropping a 2,240-pound armor-piercing shell onto a moving ship at 24 miles. The German lead transport never reached the harbor mouth. One shell hit amidships, drove through the thin steel hull, and detonated below the waterline. The ship folded and sank in minutes, blocking the channel and burning as dawn came up. A German cruiser fired broadsides into the coastal dunes trying to locate the battery. The concussion inside the casemate was savage. Dust cascading from the ceiling, crews fighting to keep their footing. Fort Church fired again. The harbor approach became a killing ground. Here is the wind condition the Germans needed, but could not disguise from their own officers. Successful invasion of the continental United States required a deep water port, one with gantry cranes, bulk unloading facilities, and the capacity to push more than 20,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts ashore every day. Boston, New York, Narragansett Bay. Every major deep-water port on the American eastern seaboard was defended by exactly this kind of gun, firing from positions no German naval shell could reliably destroy before the transports arrived. The math was immediate. Germany's best unloading route was closed. German naval commanders read the situation quickly. The harbor run was suicidal. Somewhere to the south, the outer barrier beaches of Long Island offered no concrete bunkers, only sand. The landing craft turned. The Marina Fairprom ramps dropped into Atlantic surf along the south shore, and German infantry plunged into waist-deep water under gray skies, carrying 60 pounds of equipment each. North Atlantic swells were not a river exercise. 5 flat-bottom landing craft swamped before they reached the beach. But thousands more made it. That is the honest version of this scenario. Germany's soldiers were formidable fighters, and they pushed through the surf, secured the dune line, and drove New York National Guard riflemen and local police off the road junctions in a fighting withdrawal. A 5-mile perimeter took shape along the Shinnecock Bay shore. The Panzer Tobelies and IVs rumbled off their ramps next, and immediately began to sink into wet sand. Drivers gunned engines, several bogged to their hull sides. The ones that freed themselves formed a thin armored line behind the infantry. This is the gap between cinema and engineering. Light and medium German tanks could fight on the coastal flats, but the heavy crane ships and tanker vessels that would convert this beachhead into a sustainable front sat offshore, unable to dock, unable to unload, because there was no deep water infrastructure, no gantries, no hardened quays, just sand. The Luftwaffe tried to cover the gap. 6 Junkers 390 prototypes, stripped of armor to carry any fuel across 3,000 miles of ocean, droned through cloud cover aimed at harbor facilities and patrol craft. Understand what those aircraft actually were. Experimental bombers carrying roughly 3 to 6 tons of ordnance at the absolute limit of their range, with their defensive guns reduced to save weight. Radar stations along the eastern seaboard had been tracking their approach for over an hour. P-47 Thunderbolts dove out of high cloud at 400 miles an hour with 8 50 caliber machine guns each. The unarmored wing tanks on the lead bomber caught fire on the first pass. 3 aircraft exploded before they cleared Long Island Sound. The survivors dumped their loads into the ocean and turned east. So within the first 24 hours, this is the situation. German infantry holds a real beachhead. German ships hold a real perimeter offshore. German armor is present, though partly immobile. German air power is effectively finished over the American mainland. And the single thing the mission required, a qualifying deep water port, is still entirely American. The combat supply clock stood at 14 days. That was the estimated window a landed force of this size, operating without open ocean resupply, could sustain offensive action. 14 days to crack a fortified harbor. Every hour of driving, every artillery exchange, every tank engine idling consumed a fraction of that margin that no ship could replace from across the Atlantic. The German quartermaster at a requisitioned farmhouse in West Hampton was circling numbers on a logistics chart by day 3. Numbers that told a story no tactical officer wanted to hear. The secondary resupply convoy from the Atlantic had not arrived. U.S. Navy destroyers and escort carriers had intercepted it mid-ocean, scattering the merchant ships and sinking the majority. High-rate combat expenditure on the first 2 days had consumed more fuel and ammunition than the plan had estimated. The German combat supply clock had dropped from 14 days to roughly 5. What that number meant in practice: tanks were ordered to stop idling their engines except when moving to contact. Artillery was restricted to 3 rounds per target engagement. The westward drive, which had to reach usable urban infrastructure before American mobilization fully activated, stalled 40 miles east of New York City. German officers understood that every hour spent on the dunes was an hour the American industrial machine was accelerating. They tried to slow it. Brandenburger teams sabotaged rail switches and cut communications between observation posts along the coast, creating temporary blind spots and panic in civilian telephone exchanges. Heinkel-Hay 177 bombers launched radio-guided glide bombs from outside anti-aircraft range, scoring fires on civilian docks and damaging 2 patrol cutters. The effect was genuine disruption. Scout units pulled off the coastline for internal security, fighter fuel burn rates spiking as interceptors covered extended patrol areas. None of it answered the fundamental question of throughput. Consider the comparison directly. The American domestic logistics network in mid-1942 was already the most powerful interior supply system ever assembled. Factories in Ohio and Michigan were producing ammunition faster than the military could catalog it. The United States generated nearly 60% of the world's crude oil domestically. There was no fuel scarcity to manage, no rationing decision to agonize over. While the German quartermaster in West Hampton calculated artillery rounds in single digits per gun, the Jamaica rail yards in Queens were receiving continuous trains. Flat cars loaded with M4 Sherman tanks, 105mm howitzers, and 2.5-ton trucks by the hundreds. First U.S. Army established strict one-way highway corridors. Engineers cleared derailed rail cars from sabotaged sections within hours. German shore artillery attempted to reach the critical junctions east of the city and fell short by miles. The landed force had no heavy siege guns, only the field pieces that had made the crossing. 4 days in, American troop strength on Long Island had exceeded 120,000 personnel, with essentially unlimited artillery ammunition flowing forward. The Germans had recognized this was coming. Before the U.S. forces could organize a clean armored thrust, German engineers dug anti-tank ditches into the coastal dunes and seeded the approaches with mines. POC-40 anti-tank guns waited in prepared positions under camouflage nets. The first American armored probe came in with M4 Shermans moving fast and ran directly into those guns. The Shermans burned. U.S. commanders pulled back and reconsidered. This is the version of events that surprises people. Germany's soldiers, given a defensive perimeter and prepared positions, could absolutely inflict real casualties on attacking armor. The beachhead looked, for a few hours, like it might endure longer than the supply clock suggested. The question entering day 6 was whether tactical stubbornness could outlast the arithmetic. The U.S. Army adjusted. After the failed armor probe, First Army commanders stopped trading tanks for time. The order that went out was blunt: concentrate the howitzers, feed them through the rail network, and bury the German perimeter under shells. This is what American industrial mobilization looked like from the inside. Not a heroic cavalry charge. Ammunition crates rolling continuously off GMC trucks, being stacked beside guns lined hub to hub in the Long Island Pine Barrens. American 105mm and 155mm batteries began time-on-target barrages, coordinated salvos from multiple batteries designed to arrive simultaneously, giving defenders no safe window between impacts. An estimated 40,000 rounds fell in roughly 3 hours. German veteran infantry fought from sandbag positions with genuine courage. For the first portion of the barrage, the POC 40 crews returned fire until their last crates were empty. Then they stopped, not from a tactical decision, but from the one outcome that mechanized warfare cannot negotiate away. The ammunition was gone. Every shell Germany brought across the Atlantic, every round carried at enormous cost through submarine-infested waters and shore-based interdiction, had been used. There was nothing to replace it with. Offshore, the final German convoy was making its last effort. 2 Type OR U-boats launched torpedo spreads at the American escort screen. One found a destroyer. The ship took a hit amidships, flooded, and had to be towed clear. A real American loss, a genuine German success against overwhelming odds. It changed nothing about the convoy's fate. U.S. escort carriers had aircraft in the air and radar on every surface contact. The merchant vessels were hunted down and destroyed over the course of 18 hours. 8 days after the landing, no ship carrying heavy fuel oil or tank ammunition remained afloat between the German coast and Long Island. The combat supply clock reached zero. What zero looks like is not a dramatic explosion. It is a Panzer III that cannot move because its fuel drums are empty. It is artillery crews sitting beside guns with no shells to load. It is infantry officers making surrender calculations against the sound of American trucks still arriving. The U-boat success had created one final moment of uncertainty, a suggestion that the pocket might trade losses with the Americans indefinitely. That moment lasted until the convoy reports came in. Once the last merchant burned and sank in the gray Atlantic, no mechanism remained that could reverse the arithmetic. The deep water ports were still American. The ocean supply line was severed. The interior logistics network was still accelerating. The beachhead had become a closed pocket. The German expedition commander signed the capitulation on day 10. Roughly 35,000 surviving soldiers walked toward American lines with their hands raised, passing the silent hulks of Panzer IIs settled in the beach sand, passing the same fuel drums that had been unloaded in the invasion's first hours, now empty, still beside the same machines they could no longer move. So could the United States survive a German invasion in 1942? Yes, and the reason is worth understanding precisely, because it has nothing to do with the courage of individual soldiers on either side. Germany lands. It disrupts communications, damages ships, inflicts real casualties, and holds a fortified perimeter that genuinely bloodies the first American counterattack. The price of American survival includes dead soldiers, a wrecked destroyer, burned docks, and the destruction of coastal communities whose residents had to run from an enemy no one seriously expected to arrive. That is the honest cost. The decisive factor Germany could not purchase, manufacture, or fight its way to was throughput. A nation invading a continent-sized enemy across 3,000 miles of open ocean needs to unload more than 20,000 tons of supplies every day, continuously, without losing the ability to cross the water. Germany possessed none of those things. Not the merchant fleet, not the secured sea lanes, not the deep-water cranes, not the port access. The United States possessed all of them, and additionally controlled its interior from a domestic rail and truck network that no German artillery ashore could meaningfully threaten. The Panzer III on the dune was never really a threat to New York. It was a machine that had already exhausted its capacity the moment it drove off a ramp onto sand with no fuel tanker waiting behind it. American trucks kept moving. They never stopped moving. That difference between arriving and sustaining an army is the only equation that ultimately mattered.